Everyone, welcome to the third and final session in our NSS Conference webinar series, Making ADSB Work. It's been fantastic to have nearly 100 attendees over the first 2 days of our conference, joining us for some global perspectives on ADSB from America and Australia. And we're really excited today to wind up the conference with a presentation on the New Zealand perspective and the ADSB transition by Tom Gormley. Before I hand you over for some opening remarks, those of you who have been with us for the first 2 sessions, a very warm welcome back, and very warm first welcome to anyone who's joining us for the first time for this session. For those of you who've heard it before, please forgive me. I'll briefly go through the little bits of housekeeping I have on the holding slide here, and do bear it in mind for the session. So please do ensure that your microphone remains muted and your video remains turned off for the duration. Please note that we'll be recording the presentation. This is so we can disseminate useful information from it at a later date. If you have any questions you've submitted or will submit that you wouldn't like to be captured as part of the recording, please just let us know and we'll be able to cater for that. As much as possible, please ensure that your other applications on your laptop or device are closed. This should ensure the strongest network connection possible and the least interruptions for the meeting for you. Also, if you are having difficulty, please do also refer to the joining instructions that are in the event invite for some further guidance on joining us. Please do continue to use Pigeonhole as our Q&A platform. You can see on the holding screen there, if you just type in pigeonhole.at and the passcode NSS Conference, that will bring you to our Q&A app. We've had really good interaction with this over the first 2 days, people contributing questions and voting on them as well. So please do use that right from the get-go today, and that'll help us make sure that the best questions are asked at the end of the session and provide the most value for you guys as participants here. Finally, any questions that we can't answer or don't have time to get to today, we will look to answer them after the session. So please don't be discouraged to ask any, or if we don't get around to your question during the presentation today. Fantastic. Without any further ado then, I hope everyone enjoys the webinar for this evening, and I'm going to hand over to Director of New Southern Sky, Steve Smith, for some opening remarks. Over to you, Steve.
Hey, thanks, Lorcan, and thanks to everybody that's joined us this evening. As Lorcan said, it's our third and final webinar in this series, Making ADSB Work. So tonight, it's my very great pleasure to introduce one of our own. It's Tom Gormley from the NSS team. Tom originally joined us back around 2018 as the project lead for ADSB. And at that stage, Tom had fairly limited aviation knowledge. I'm pleased to say that that has changed considerably. In February of this year, Tom participated in the US Industry Equip 2020 meeting in Washington, DC, and subsequently the Aircraft Electronics Association conference in Adelaide. So this is the point that I discovered that Tom is a bit of a sponge. Information he hoovers up, and he's now my go-to man for information on lots of things, but particularly ADSB. So he's rapidly gathered a body of knowledge, both technical and operating, and is now the go-to guy for that ADSB knowledge. So I definitely rely on Tom heavily for system advice, and he hasn't let me down yet. So back in March during lockdown, Tom was appointed the technical advisor for the ADSB grant scheme, and we'll hear from him tonight on how that's going. Now, Tom's got a really good story to tell here on where we're at with ADSB in New Zealand. So I think I'd better let him get on with it. So over to you, Tom. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Steve. I'm just going to turn my camera on so everyone can see me. Great. I've been described as a lot of things, but sponge is certainly a new one. So thanks very much for that. Right, I'm just going to go straight into it. I did have a little intro into myself, but Steve's basically done all of it. So I'm just going to let you know what we're going to go into today. So we're going to start with just a bit of a basic intro into ADSB. We've heard quite a lot from our FAA and Australian counterparts in the last couple of days onto how ADSB works, so I'm not going to dwell on that too much. I'm going to move into onto our receiver network, which Airways has completed, transponder usage, some top ADSB tips and some benefits, before moving on to some rules updates, a tracking update on how equipage in New Zealand is going, before moving on to the grant scheme. I'm going to leave quite a bit of time at the end for Q&As, There might be quite a few questions that you have, and I've had some come in over the last few days, so I'll try to include them into my presentation as well. So if you have any questions, please let me know. So moving on, just going to go straight into how ADSB works, and as I say, the FAA have already gone into this quite a bit. So our primary surveillance system at the moment is secondary surveillance radars, and on the left of the slide there you can see exactly how that works. That's a signal sent between a radar out to the aircraft, which has a transponder on, and it responds. Essentially, it is an interrogate, and then the aircraft responds to the interrogation. And radar updates air traffic control, as it says there, about every 5 seconds, the time it takes for the radar head to rotate the full 360 degrees. Now, different to that, ADSB is automatic, no interrogation is required. And so ADSB is replacing the radars as the primary surveillance system in New Zealand. And above flight level 245, that is already in place and has been since the end of 2018. It will be in all controlled airspace in New Zealand with the current proposed mandate of 31st December 2021. Now, ADSB works by the aircraft still having the transponder, but potentially a slightly different one, so that it can interface with a position source, with a GPS receiver. And the aircraft gets their position from a GNSS satellite, and so in our case it will be GPS, and then it broadcasts the data and its location up to twice a second down to the ground stations that we have in New Zealand, and which then passes that information on to air traffic control. Now, we can also get ADSB in, obviously, on the aircraft. That's where the aircraft itself can have a receiver in the cockpit. And that means that other aircraft that are transmitting with ADSB out can be visible to the pilot itself through an existing compatible display or an iPad or tablet. So just moving on, the benefits of ADSB are really quite evident for the system as a whole, whether that's saving money on replacing expensive radars, or the ability to reduce separation, which means it's a major benefit for airlines in saving fuel and obviously saving considerable resources. There are many benefits for smaller operators and private pilots, and these are the four main ones that we see, and I'm going to discuss most of them, or I'm going to discuss all of them later in the presentation, but I'm going to start off with the one in the top left there, the increase in surveillance coverage. So this is what a receiver looks like in New Zealand. This is our one that's overlooking the beautiful Lake Wakatipu, and once the data is collected by one of these stations, it's then fed straight into the air traffic management system. Now, there are 26 ADSB ground receiver stations throughout the country, and Airways completed the installation of this network ahead of schedule in September 2019. So all of the stations are already operational. They're providing data to the air traffic management system for use as we speak. As you can see by the green dots that are on the map there, this is our current secondary surveillance radars and where they're located. And so if you can see, there's clearly an increase in coverage that will be obtained from this, and it is a 45% increase on current levels, and it's right down to low levels as well, including ground level in a number of locations. You can see from that, especially down in the far south and also in the far north, there's increased coverage just by these receiver stations being there. And you can see that better from this comparison coverage map. So this is a comparison between the SSR coverage, which is the red, which you can just see poking out from some of the blue and underneath it. But the blue is our current ADSB coverage. And now you can clearly see that most of the North Island is covered, and this is at just 1,000 feet. The additional coverage, as I said, far south, west coast, and even far north is a huge improvement on the existing secondary surveillance radar coverage. At higher levels, around about 3,000 feet, almost all of North Island is covered, and almost all of the country, other than the southwest of South Island, which just shows that if you're transmitting ADSB data at around about 3,000 feet anywhere in the country, you are likely to be detected. Now I'm just going to pause there, because if you see me waving my arms around at any point, it means the lights are going to go off in this part of the building. So I'm going to do it now anyway. So I apologize if you do see me doing that at any point. I'm just going to quickly skim back to this slide that you saw before. We have had a query as to what the contingency for ADSB will be in the event of a GPS outage. Now, Airways will be delivering a contingency. It's currently the intention that it will be in the form of 3 back-to-back primary and secondary surveillance radars that will cover the main trunk of New Zealand. And the main trunk is Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch. And these 3 backups will be able to be used for separation around those 3 major hubs. Now, of course, until those the current secondary surveillance radars are decommissioned, they will remain as the primary means of surveillance below flight level 245, and that is until the ADSB in all controlled airspace rule comes into force. Now, you will only be detected by this increased coverage if you are operating your transponder correctly. Now, there has been some proposed changes, and you might have seen the proposed changes come out at the beginning of the year for public consultation. And I'm just going to go over one of them at the moment, which is quite a change from what the existing rule might be, or what the existing rule is. The proposed change reads as follows. Now, except as provided in those 2 rules, that a person must not operate an aircraft in controlled airspace unless the aircraft is transmitting ADSB data at all times when the aircraft begins to move under its own power until it has come to a complete stop at the end of the flight. Now, this means that the transponder needs to be switched on and transmitting ADSB data that meets the minimum performance requirement before the aircraft moves. Now, this will probably mean some changes to your standard operating procedures around the transponder usage. And that main, as I say, that main change to your current mode A, C or S transponder, you do need to ensure that it's switched on, is meeting minimum performance levels from the moment you move. Now, while you might not know what the performance of the data is, you do need to ensure that there are no warnings, either audible or visual from the transponder, indicating that there's no ADSB. Now, the best way to do that and to find out if you're getting any warning, any messages, just refer to your operating manual, have a look and see what it says, and it should be able to give you some further information on what your transponder should be saying. Now, this will often mean, and I've pointed it out on the slide there, that you will need to select the Alt function as soon as you power on. Now, it might not necessarily be the Alt function. Again, check your operating manual to see what function it needs to be in. But predominantly, it will be the Alt function. Now, most, if not all, modern transponders can be programmed to start in Alt mode straight away. Again, check your user manual or visit your avionics workshop for advice on how that can be done. This will ensure that your system will be detecting altitude, and now you need to be detecting altitude straight away, and that includes when the aircraft is on the ground. Now, that will make sure that it's transmitting an accurate position data. So switching the transponder to on or alt function after the aircraft has moved can cause some issues, and that will mean that acceptable data is not being transmitted, and I'll go into that a bit more in a moment. So, if you are moving before transmitting ADSB data, you might wonder why setting the transponder makes such a difference. And it is, as I mentioned a couple of times, simply because the equipment needs some time to fully start transmitting ADSB data. Now, if it's set to on or alt after the aircraft move, I mentioned it can cause issues, potentially for the GPS receiver, and the data that is being transmitted might not meet the minimum performance requirements. Now, if you're not meeting the minimum performance requirements, and as you can see on the slide there, 91.257A, it may mean that you're in breach of that rule. And the rule says you must be transmitting, or you must not be transmitting non-compliant data, and that includes the ADSB data or even use of a transponder which doesn't meet our system requirements. And the one that's mentioned there is the 978, which is the universal access transceivers that they use in America. We're not using them in New Zealand. Alternatively, if you're not meeting those minimum performance requirements, it could lead to access to controlled airspace being restricted. So the air traffic management system, it can detect if ADSB data does not meet the minimum performance requirements. And for separation, this can also mean that ADSB data is discounted and is only used for situational awareness by a controller only. Now, I've mentioned there that aircraft can be put on a suppression list. Now, the suppression list is where if the aircraft consistently is not meeting the minimum performance requirements, any ADSB data can be discounted. Now, I don't know how often that is happening, but let's say you do get put on a suppression list and then your ADSB data becomes acceptable later on. it will not be known straight away because you are on a suppression list and that data is not being used. It's just something to think of. Once you are aware that the data is not meeting those minimum performance requirements, you need to go and do something about it. And it could be something, it could be the operation of the transponder. And as I say, you need to make sure the transponder is operating correctly, or it could be there's an issue with the installation, in which case go to your avionics workshop and they should be able to help you. So as I mentioned, I receive a number of reports from Airways each month of aircraft that have been detected with transmitting what is an ALT unknown, so the altitude unknown. This normally indicates that the transponder has not been set to the correct setting for transmitting ADS-B data. It also means that the NIC value, so the navigational integrity category value, will be often be 0 when it needs to be 5 or above. And this naturally means that the minimum performance requirements are not being met, and you will again be in breach of that rule there, 91257A. So if you're having any issues with your equipment, please do contact your avionics workshops. They are clearly the experts in this and they will be able to assist. And it could just be as easy as directing you to the operating manual, as I've mentioned a couple of times before. Now, again, for any queries on what equipment to choose for your aircraft, please discuss this with your workshop. On paper, some bits of equipment might look like the best option for your aircraft. Once you've spoken to the workshop, they'll be able to tell you if that is the case or not. Some bits that look best on paper will not be acceptable for your aircraft potentially. So I would go and discuss that with your workshop. Please do get in quick though. A lot of workshops are extremely busy at the moment. And the longer you wait, the more likely it is that they'll be able to see you before ADS-B becomes mandatory in controlled airspace. And do take into account that the COVID-19 has affected the delivery of equipment from overseas, so there may be longer waits than expected. For a list of our avionics workshops, as you can see there, they're on the ADS-B website, and I've put a link in at the end of this presentation, so you'll be able to get to the ADS-B website, and you'll be able to find that from there. So I'm just going to move quickly on to my two main top tips for transponder operation. And the first one, as we've already just seen, please ensure that the transponder is transmitting ADS-B data before moving. This is going to it's coming into the rule part. It needs to be done. The second bit is, I would seriously recommend always transmitting ADS-B, even in uncontrolled airspace. And there are a number of benefits, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. So I'm going to go into these in a bit more detail now. The first one is around ADS-B in. This is where the aircraft has a receiver and can receive other ADS-B out, transmitting data of aircraft that could be around them. So the increased situational awareness can be invaluable. And there was an article in Vector magazine, the Winter 2020 edition, that was written by Ian Andrews, Ian Sinclair, and Stephen Perot. And you'll also, if you attended last night's webinar, Andrew Anderson talked about all of the benefits of ADS-B in and the ability to see other aircraft that you might not have known have been there previously. Now, just a little warning around the use of ADS-B in. Not all aircraft can be seen. Remember, this is only those that are transmitting ADS-B out. And so it is for situational awareness only, but the benefits can be massive. Those aircraft that you can't see, Stephen in the Vector magazine mentioned that he was flying over an area that he flies over regularly, and then suddenly there was a target on his ADS-B in. And it was a helicopter that was on ground but was still transmitting the data, and he would never have seen it. So if a helicopter had decided to take off, it could have caused him issues. But as he was already aware of it, he was already keeping a good lookout for it. The second benefit there is the less position reporting to ATC, which gives you more time to think. So the increased ADS-B coverage means that ATC are more aware of your position, and that means you need to spend less time on the radio confirming location. Now, that can be more time spent on a visual lookout for other aircraft, and it is just one less distraction. So it's another benefit, which is just helping you fly the aircraft. The biggest benefit that I see is for the emergency location, the more precise information on your aircraft's position in an emergency. And as we heard from the FAA, in search and rescue operations, rescuers were able to locate incidents up to 2.5 hours faster with ADS-B than without. Now that's an incredible amount of time. That really is the difference between life and death. We have a couple of examples from here in New Zealand, and my thanks to Quilt and Beale for allowing me to use these slides. This is an incident from a couple of years ago. The final ADS-B transmission was only 59 meters from the initial wreckage of the aircraft. And that just shows how accurate ADS-B can be if it's only 59 meters away. Moving on to the second one, this is another issue where another incident where the aircraft came down, and it came down in dense bush. Now this was in the Coromandel. The aircraft was located extremely quickly because it was only 94 meters from the final ADS-B transmission, and I believe it was located within an hour, which, as I say, that can be the difference between life and death. And to me, that is the biggest benefit. If there's any issue that you ever have, you'll be able to be located extremely quickly. Now, we've had a fair bit of feedback that some people are having concerns with ADS-B and with websites such as the ones that you see there, Plane Finder, FlightAware, Flight Radar. There are many, many others. Now, this is particularly around the privacy of operations. So any 1080 spreading, police ops, military. There's some people that use Flight Radar to compete for work contracts, other disputes as well. Now, I'm sure many of you will be aware of the FAA's PIA program, which is the Privacy ICAO addresses, and Dan Hickok spoke about that on Tuesday. Now, what this is the FAA has a program where you can request an alternate hex code or an ICAO address to be programmed into your transponder in place of your existing one. Now, this is a maintenance issue. You have to go and get the new hex code installed as such into your transponder. Now, what this will be, this hex code will not relate to any aircraft that are on the aircraft register, and therefore, if it's picked up by Flight Radar or anything like that, it does not show what the aircraft is, who the registered owner is, anything like that, and it keeps the identity of who's flying a bit more private. Now, while this could potentially be an option in New Zealand, and we have investigated it, we don't currently have the resource to run a similar program. Personnel costs on their own could run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, we are open to working with any groups that would be interested in running a program alongside the CAA, and we welcome any suggestions. So just at the moment, we don't have a similar program. We're not looking into any further, but if anyone has any suggestions, please do get in touch. Now, there are some current remedies for using with Flight Radar and FlightAware, and the first one is to contact the website. Most, if not all, of the websites can remove your aircraft from their active feed. Now, we're aware that some of them do request a fee for doing so, or to sign up for a subscription. But in the first case, if you want your aircraft removed from their feed, do contact them. Another option, which in some respects is similar to the PIA program, but on a very basic level, is that you can have your aircraft registered owner details made private on the New Zealand Civil Aviation Register. Now, while this doesn't remove the aircraft from the tracking websites, it does mean that the websites themselves will be unable to obtain the registered owner's name from the register. Now, this is a free service. You can contact the aircraft registrar, and they will just take it out. And so on the aircraft register, it will still have your aircraft details, it'll still have the hex code, but in the bit where it says registered owner, it will say private. This might be all that you need. There is also, for some of those operations that I mentioned above, the 1080 spreading, police ops, military, there is a proposed rule for discrete operations. And I'm just going to read the part in the proposed rule now, and this is part 91255D, and that's operation of aircraft without ADS-B for discrete operations. Now, this says a person may operate an aircraft without transmitting ADS-B data in the prescribed airspace if the person is carrying out a discrete operation. And the options are for national defence or security purposes, for intelligence or law enforcement purposes, or for any other suitable purpose approved by the director, where the transmitting of ADS-B data would compromise the security of the operation or pose a safety risk to the aircraft, crew, or people and property in the air or on the ground. Now, this may mean that you'd be able to switch off your transponder and complete your operation You would need to get in touch with air traffic control to ensure that you can still access the airspace you want and to work out a plan on how that's going to be done. But by switching off the transponder or switching off ADS-B transmission, you will not be able to be seen on the flight radars and such. Now, you can do this, and also, as it says there, ADS-B isn't going to be mandated in uncontrolled airspace. We're still encouraging everybody to transmit ADS-B data at all times. The benefits are huge, and we've already seen what they are. We would strongly encourage you to always be transmitting the ADS-B data. And we've actually also heard of benefits of these websites as well. One benefit of the websites is the ability to go back and review past flights if you have a subscription. Now, this can help with debriefs and even training and learnings that can be achieved from the data that is available on these websites. And this could be a real benefit for flight training skills. And also, we heard from Andrew Anderson yesterday, gliding schools or any other gliding aerodromes are using these websites to see if there are any other aircraft in the vicinity, and if there are, they're not letting any further aircraft take off, so to tow the gliders, or if there's anything else in the vicinity, on giving them some advice on how they can land and in which direction they can land. And I see that as an invaluable resource. Now, a topic that I know a lot of people have been interested in is the Notice of Requirement NTC 91258 update to revision 2. Now, I was hoping to be able to say that it has now been released, but the revised notice is currently sitting with the acting director for final sign-off, and this should be released by the end of next week at the latest. We're almost there. I can talk about the changes though. And so first of all, it is going to be released alongside a summary of the submissions that were received from the public consultation. Now, the consultation came to an end in August, and since then we've been going over the submissions and making comments on all of those submissions. These will come out with the revision. There are also some explanatory notes, and they were sent out alongside the public consultation and can be found on the CAA website. And I'll add a link at the end as well as to where you can find these. Now, just as a very basic overview of the three main updates to the notice, and the first one is the big one, the one that people have been waiting for, is that position source equipment. That is the GPS receiver that integrates with the transponder. Position source equipment that do not meet the TSOs or the technical standard orders that are listed in the notice or in the existing notice are potentially acceptable as part of an ADS-B system. However, they're not automatically accepted. So the certification team does still need to approve this equipment. And these are bits of equipment that the main ones that people have been looking at is the Trig TN72 in X configuration, Garmin GPS 20A, and the Dynon SV GPS 2020. Now, as I say, they are not automatically approved by the release of the notice. They do still need to go through the certification team to assess if they can be used in the New Zealand surveillance system. Now, to start this process, email the certification team, and I've added their email address to the end of this presentation. There are a number of interested parties already. I know that Gliding New Zealand had a conversation with our certification team recently. I would advise you to go and speak to your group. So Gliding New Zealand, Sports Aviation, something similar to that. They might be able to put in a submission on your behalf. Now, please don't forget as well that acceptable technical data requirements remain, and so please review your requirements as per your certificate of airworthiness or your microlight flight permit. They still remain. The second major change is the clarification of power requirements. Now, the power requirements are in line with ICAO guidelines and plus TSO C112. Now, these power requirements, the clarification is not something that has just been randomly decided on. This requirement has been in place for transponders for many years. This is just a clarification, as there have been many queries around the requirement. So just take a look at the box there on the slide. This is what you need to meet. And so when deciding on what equipment to install in your aircraft, you need to keep the power output of the equipment in mind. Finally, the message set elements at the back of the notice have also been reviewed and updated. There were in the current version some elements that didn't align, which caused some differences between the DO260 standards. Now, this I would advise you to take a look at, particularly your avionics workshops, and I'm sure we have a few of them on tonight. Please just take a look. They should all now be aligned and should be correct. There have been a few other minor amendments and clarifications to the notice, and I would encourage everyone to take a look at the most up-to-date version once it has been released. Now, I'm just going to clarify some other points with the notice as well, and around the ADSB rules themselves. So first of all, both elements of an ADSB system must meet the system standards as listed in NTC 91.258. This applies to all aircraft, including amateur built and microlight aircraft, and it applies for equipping with ADSB for use in controlled airspace. We are aware of some aircraft that are using equipment that does not meet the current TSO standards within the notice, and the equipment has not yet been approved by the director either. So this equipment cannot be used until it has been approved. And if you have any queries or any concerns, go to your workshop or come and contact one of us at the CAA. Next, all ADSB systems must be installed by a radio Group 3 rated LAMI. Now, this has been a small update in the new revision by just clarifying what Group 3 category is required, and it's the radio Group 3 category rated licensed aircraft maintenance engineer, or an equivalent authorised person in a Part 145 maintenance organisation. Now, if the system has not been installed by an appropriately rated or authorised engineer, it must be inspected and released to service, or inspected and certified as being acceptable by a radio Group 3 rated engineer. Now, again, this is for all aircraft. There are no exceptions. This still needs to happen for your microlights, for your amateur built aircraft. Now, one thing as well I'd like to point out on this to the workshops and engineers, particularly who undertake ADSB installations, please ensure that you do adhere to the correct standards and requirements for acceptable technical data. This is very important, obviously. And plus, installations do need to follow the STC and the installation manual guidelines. And a little bit of a plea, please don't cut corners and reduce the quality of these installations. It can mean that the equipment fails. It could mean that the performance requirements aren't met, and it could mean that the pilot is then in breach of the 91.257A rule of not transmitting acceptable data. So moving on to Part 91 of the Civil Aviation Rules. As we already know, above flight level 245, since the end of 2018, all aircraft in controlled airspace must be transmitting ADSB data. And once the full transition to ADSB in all controlled airspace has occurred, you must be transmitting acceptable data at all times in all controlled airspace. Now you'll see here, this is the picture there. This is a UAvionics Sky Echo, and a number of people have queried that what can we do outside of controlled airspace, and if equipment that doesn't meet the minimum performance requirements can be used outside of controlled airspace. Now, this is generally referred to as electronic conspicuity equipment, and recently we've been looking into that a bit more here. So this is where we are with using this sort of equipment outside of controlled airspace. This is a decision for each operator around the safety benefits that these bits of equipment might provide, and it's also a decision around any risks that they might provide as well. Now, they must not be used in a manner that contravenes any existing civil aviation rule or other appropriate safety requirement, and it's critical that these devices, that if they're used, do not compromise the safety of the existing air traffic management systems. So if you're asked not to use them, if air traffic management say that you're causing an issue with their systems, it must be stopped. And remember, this is not an alternative for a compliant ADSB system in controlled airspace. Now, we'll move on to the grant scheme shortly, but these pieces of equipment, they are not eligible for the out portion of the grant. That's because they do not meet the minimum performance requirements. However, if they have an ADSB in receiver included as part of them, you would be able to claim the in portion of the grant using one of these bits of equipment. And we're aware of several people that have already submitted applications for using these pieces of equipment. Now, For ADS-B rules in the future, there's been a couple of queries around what's going to happen in the future and if there are any other plans. Now, firstly, there are no plans to mandate ADS-B outside of controlled airspace. However, as I mentioned several times, the benefits of ADS-B are clear and we encourage its use at all times. As we saw in the FAA presentation on Tuesday, those not accessing rules airspace are still equipping with ADS-B in huge numbers as they recognise the benefits that are available, and we encourage everyone here to do the same. But as I say, there are no plans currently to mandate ADS-B outside of controlled airspace. Also, we've had a query about any trials that are currently ongoing in New Zealand, such as those currently being conducted by the UK CAA. Now, this is into the use of ADS-B data at uncontrolled airports with an aerodrome flight information service. Now, what these trials are in the UK is that an ADS-B receiver is being purchased and being put on the outside of a building or the tower there, and running a feed through a screen and an electronic flight bag application into the tower. Now, this gives an additional and great situational awareness for the flight information service officers, and we think it's a great idea. And something that aerodromes over here may, with a flight information service, may wish to look into. But as far as we're aware, there are no trials currently underway. If you want to make any suggestions or recommendations, or would like to look into this yourself, if you operate a flight information service at an aerodrome, please get in touch and we'll see if there's anything that we can help with. Now, I'm just going to move on to a tracking update of how New Zealand are tracking with ADS-B equipped aircraft. And this is our latest update from just a few days ago for our October month. Now, the new number of ADS-B equipped aircraft that were detected in October was 86 more aircraft. Now, that is the largest amount that we've received in 1 month. And that means that we are up to a total number of aircraft currently in the New Zealand system of 1,183 aircraft. Now, you will see in the bottom right-hand corner of that slide, that is where these aircraft have been detected with the new ADS-B capability. The interesting number there is the number of aircraft that have been detected on South Island. So we did, as part of the New Southern Sky programme, a survey of the capacity of workshops back in September last year. And this survey showed that South Island workshops, their capacity was around about 32 aircraft a month. Now, if we're seeing 34 aircraft being detected in South Island, these workshops could possibly be at their capacity, if not they're very, very close to it. So I would encourage everyone to plan an installation. If you've not already got one, plan an installation as soon as you're able to avoid any delays or any bottlenecks the closer we get to the mandate. This is just an overview of all of the aircraft that are on the current Civil Aviation Register and how many of those aircraft are equipped. We're almost at 25% of the entire register, encouraging numbers in the aeroplane, helicopter and amateur-built aeroplane categories. Although we recognise that gliders and microlights need to start equipping with ADS-B to get those numbers up to be allowed into controlled airspace once the rule comes into play. And we do hope that with the release of the Notice of Requirement revision, there will be a pathway for these aircraft types to now start equipping in greater numbers. And we'll keep an eye on that and hope that continues to increase in the coming months. And moving on to the ADS-B grant scheme, the grant scheme came in or was announced on the 4th of October last year, and the scheme is intended to assist those operators with some funds to equipping with ADS-B, and it's all about trying to get as many aircraft equipped with ADS-B as possible. Now, the scheme went live on the 23rd of March, and as Steve mentioned, I came into this role shortly afterwards, and the scheme is for up to $2,500 plus GST for ADS-B out being installed in your aircraft, and up to $500 plus GST for ADS-B in. Now, it is the most generous ADS-B grant scheme in the world. We heard again from the FAA on Tuesday. Their scheme was just for $500, and that was for 20,000 single-engine piston aircraft. Now, we're not being quite as narrow with which aircraft can equip. And we're believing that up to 4,000 aircraft will be able to will be able to get some money from the grant scheme. Now, if you think there's only 4,900 aircraft currently on the register, 4,000 aircraft, that's a pretty good chunk of the entire register that is able to enter the grant scheme. Now, there's two people that run the grant scheme. That's myself and also Farah Hussain, who is our administrator for the scheme. And if you've come into the scheme at any point at all, you'll have probably spoken to one of us. Now, I'm just going to go through the process for claiming a grant. Now, this is the same process for everybody. It doesn't matter if you've already installed with ADSB or if you're starting right from the beginning and you haven't even got an installation yet. And we base this process on the FAA system, but it's a little more simplified. So step one is just to book. So it's to book an installation with your avionics provider if you haven't already equipped with ADSB. And then you need to apply to enter the scheme. And on the website, you'll be able to see we've broken these 4 steps down into little drop-down sections where you'll be able to see the information for each of them. And in the apply section is where you'll find the application form. Now, to enter the scheme, we will require some information regarding the registered owner of the aircraft itself, the equipment you'll be installing, and who will be completing the installation. And if you haven't already had the equipment installed, when that's going to be, or when you anticipate that's going to be, when your booking is going to be. Now, this is to ensure that you meet the criteria for the grant, first of all. And you will also be provided with a unique application reference number once the application has been approved. And once it has been approved, that means that your funds are reserved, and they are reserved for up to 12 months. And in that 12 months, what you need to do is get the installation completed, get all the paperwork and the supporting evidence, and then submit a claim to us. And I'll go on to the claim in a moment. But you have 12 months to do that. On the website, you might note that it says 6 months, but due to COVID, we've increased that out to 12 months, just to give everyone a bit more time, because the workshops may be a little bit behind because of lockdown. So we're just giving that a little bit more time. Step 3 is install and validate. Now, you have to have the installation completed, and then you need to, the validate section is flying the aircraft where it can be detected by the ADSB ground network. Now, we've said in most of our paperwork that you need to fly in controlled airspace. That is where we know that you will be picked up by ADSB ground receivers. So if in any doubt, fly in or as close to as possible controlled airspace, which will then ensure that you will be picked up by that receiver network. Finally, once you've done that, you can submit a claim. So when we provide you with a unique application reference number, you'll also be provided with a link to the claim form. The claim form isn't on any website or anything. We have to provide it to you directly. Once you've received this, you can complete the form with your unique code, and we need you to confirm the information, and that does include confirming the registered owner, confirming the aircraft, confirming the equipment, and that is just to ensure that nothing has changed. We have had some claims already come in where the registered owner has changed between the apply section and the claim section, so we need to make sure that nothing has changed. As part of this, we will also ask for some evidence, and the evidence required is evidence of the serial number of the equipment that you've installed, a logbook entry to show when it was installed, what has been installed, and the acceptable technical data, if applicable, what has been used to install that equipment. We'll also need some ground test results. Now, as part of the notice of requirement, you do also need to do a ground test on the equipment to ensure it's working before it flies. And we all need evidence that those ground tests have been undertaken. And finally, we also need an invoice to see how much has been paid for the equipment. You'll notice when I was saying how much the amounts were for the grant, it was up to 2,500 and up to 500. Now, if what you've paid for the equipment and the installation of the equipment is under either of those amounts for out or in, then we'll only pay up to the amount, which is why we need to see the invoice. So there are some pieces of in equipment which are below $500. If you've only spent $350, we'll reimburse the full $350. That will be the grant amount. And only once all of these stages are complete will the funds be paid out. Now, currently, the grant scheme has seen over 900 applications received, with over 580 claims received as well. And at the end of October, we'd approved 515 of those claims, which totals almost $1.6 million inclusive of GST. So there are plenty of funds remaining. We anticipate the funds to be still be remaining at least for over a year to come. And however, I would encourage you to get your applications in, get a booking and get your applications in as soon as possible to ensure that you reserve those funds. And we've also had a few queries around the grant scheme as well, just in advance. So I thought I'd respond to them straight away. And first of all, how many in applications are we receiving, and how many people are equipping with ADSB in? Now, approximately 50%, and it's actually just crept over 50% of all applications that we're receiving include an in element. Now, you don't have to apply for both out and in at the same time. You can have already installed ADSB out, and then later on you decide you do want the in element, so you can apply for an in grant as well. So we've had about 50% of all applications include an in element, which is encouraging. However, we want to get more and more people seeing the benefits of ADSB in and really going and getting, even if it's one of these cheaper pieces of equipment, which you can then claim the full amount back on. Seems like a good deal to me. So applications, how long are they taking to be approved? Applications at the moment should be approved within around about 5 working days, if not quicker. Claims are taking a little bit longer at the moment. It's predominantly me that will check the claims, and with a lot of them coming in, it can take a little bit of time. So it's taking around about 20 working days currently. What happens once a claim has been approved, if it's within, let's say, October, if it's approved before the end of the month, we then run a what's known as a batch file, and that gets sent to our finance department, and the finance department requests the funds for all of those claims that were approved in that month, and they have to request the funds from the Ministry of Transport. Once we've received the funds from the ministry, the grants get paid out on the 20th of the next month. So if you're in the October batch, you'll be paid out in November. Now, if you've got any questions around the grant scheme, there's a whole load of information on the ADSB grant scheme website, and I would encourage you to check all of the information on the website before applying. There's FAQs, there's top tips, there's plenty of stuff on there. Please go and have a look at that, or if not, you can get in touch with either myself or Farah, and we should be able to help you. And that comes to the end of my presentation. I do have a good solid 20 minutes of Q&A available. And before we go into that, I'm just going to mention that we do have Rens Molinar, who's an avionics engineer with the CAA in the certification team, who should be available. And I'm just going to quickly ask, Rens, are you there?
Yes, I am. I was just struggling to find my mute button, as usual.
Fantastic. Good stuff. Yep. Thanks, Rens. So just before we move on to the Q&A session, as I mentioned, we have some links and we have some email addresses at the end of here. So if you want to have any of those links, this presentation will be available, or alternatively, you can just email myself and I can provide the information to you. So Steve, Lorcan, we're moving on to Q&A.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that presentation, Tom. Lots of really, really useful information, and great to see us moving from those global perspectives in America and Australia to what's contextual and most relevant and best practice information that's of value to the participants here today in New Zealand. So I'll move straight on to the questions and answers section. Again, I'd encourage everyone to join us on pigeonhole.at, the passcode NSS Conference. You can find that in the chat bar, or you can type it straight into your internet browser. And without further delay, Tom, I'll fire one or two at you. We've had some really good interaction. We've also had some back and forth comments on those questions. So I'll still throw the information over to you, and yourself or Rens may wish to respond to them also. I know Rens has been active on that Q&A also. So I might still ask for that comment to be made again, just so that it's audible to all the participants in case anyone isn't on Pigeonhole just at the moment. So the first question for you. This is a question we actually had earlier in the week, but we just wanted to hold it back to this third webinar session because we felt that would be the most appropriate time for it. And the question is, does the CAA intend to follow the lead of the UK in promoting the use of affordable ADSB conspicuity devices outside controlled airspace as an additional defence in the see and be seen environment?
Yeah, sure. So as was mentioned earlier in the presentation, electronic conspicuity devices, so long as they don't breach any civil aviation rule, or they don't get in the way as such of the air traffic management system. It's down to the operator themselves to make the decision of whether that will be beneficial, and also to have a look at what the risks are as well. So long as they're not in breach of any of the rules, that's for their decision to be made.
Excellent, thank you, Tom. And I appreciate there may be some crossover here between some of the content that you've covered in some detail already. The next question then, for mobile ADSB in equipment that can be claimed for, in brackets ping, Sky Echo, are they required to be claimed against an aircraft registration? Does that imply the equipment needs to stay with that aircraft?
Yeah, so you do need to apply for one piece of equipment to one aircraft, and also provide the serial number and the part number of that piece of equipment. So what we're not wanting people to do is to get one of these, the UAvionics ping, for example, which can potentially cost under $500. It's used for 6 or 7 different aircraft, say, and they all claim for that one piece of equipment. Now that's not what it's intended for at all. You're just taking funds away from other people that might be able to use the grant. So the intention is it can only be claimed against for one aircraft.
Excellent, thanks, Tom. The next question for you then, in relation to the grant scheme, what percentage of the scheme has been claimed so far, and is there a projected date that available funds will run out?
Percentage? Oh, I'm not too sure. However, it's quite low at the moment. So the overall grant pot as such was $12.5 million. Obviously, a proportion of that needs to go to setting up the scheme, to pay for the personnel that run the scheme. But as I say, that we're still intending up to 4,000 aircraft being able to claim funds. And if we've only got 515 so far, obviously there's still a rather large amount to go.
Fantastic. So I can get some in my Christmas stocking from Santa, according to Andrew.
Certainly can.
Excellent. So the next question for you, and there's a bit of conversation on this one in the comments also. So does the ADSB transmitted alt data come from GPS or altimeter pressure setting, or a blend of the two? And some of the comments that we've had on it are saying that both are sent, but ATC use the pressure altitude corrected locally for area QNH. And then a further comment saying that Barrow alt is used for ADSB.
I have nothing on this. This would be Renz. Do you have any further comments, Mike?
Yeah, in principle, the ADSB system sees GPS altitude, but it isn't used for the ADSB system as such. It's for different reasons. Airways is sure to be able to correct me on the exact reasons, but it has to do with we don't have SPAS, so GPS altitude is not always accurate, and we have other aircraft that may be using Barrow, so we want an equal playing field on what's transmitted. Hence, yeah, the Barrow altitude, so from your altitude encoder, is used for the ADSB altitude.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Renz, for that input. The next question that I have then for you, Tom. Yeah, it is, where are we at looking at devices that squit compliant data using the Aspen chipset, such as the Dynon 2020, Trig TN72, MGL SB12, but currently do not meet the GPS positional accuracy required?
Yeah, so that was mentioned earlier on, and these pieces of equipment may potentially come available once the revision to the notice of requirement has been released. So those pieces of equipment, I'm unsure of the NGL. Renz might be able to comment on that, but the other pieces of equipment, they will need to be assessed by the certification team before they can become available. So an application needs to be put to the certification team so they can start the assessment process before those bits of equipment can be used.
Excellent, thank you, Tom. The next question then, we've got loads coming in. Thank you very much for your contributions, guys. Please do continue to send them in and vote on ones you'd like to see discussed also. The next one is the most recent question, but has also shot up on the votes. And it says, for an EC device prior to purchase, how will an owner know if the equipment will or will not interfere with ATC?
The best way here is to see how close you are, I guess, to controlled airspace. But it's more of I don't know. You don't think you'd be able to find out in advance without discussing with Airways. This is just a little bit that we've put in on the edge of our policy recommendation here, is that if it does interfere with air traffic control and they are advising you of its interference, that would need to be discussed with Airways and what you can do. I don't think there's anything you can see in advance as such. I don't know, friends, if you have any further comment at all.
No, in principle, depending how close you are to the receiver of the ADSB, Airways will see the device. It will be displayed slightly different because it doesn't meet the performance specifications. So depending on the amount of traffic, it may be a nuisance to them. It is a bit dependent. If the devices are built to be seen by ADSB in systems, that means the ADSB network will see it as well. It just depends how close it is to the receiver and what other traffic is around to see if it interferes.
Thanks, Renz. Thanks, Tom. I can move on to the next question now, although I do also note, Tom, that Andy Alford from Airways is on the line in case you would like to introduce him and or invite him to comment on a question if appropriate.
Sure, if Andy has a comment on that last one, that'd be great.
Would you like to give?
Hi, thanks for that. The concern I would have would be our ability to determine that it is a non-certified ADSB device, and therefore whether we would need to be able to suppress it from our system or not, and how we would do that. So it would depend on the message output, and if there was a method of the EC device telling us it was an EC device and not a certified ADSB device.
Great, thanks very much, Andy, and thanks, Tom. So Tom and Andy Alford work quite closely together, as Andy Alford is the person at Airways that Tom liaises most closely with in relation to ADSB and a lot of other bits regarding ADSB. So Andy, thank you very much for your comment. It's really appreciated. A few more questions then I can move on towards next. And this one also has a comment attached to it, Tom. It's been commented on by Renz, but I'll still submit it to you guys for discussion for the wider group or for a confirmation of that. The question is, how does a pilot know if the ADSB data is not meeting the required standard? And Renz's response was, assuming the system has been tested working correctly, the most common error will be relating to GPS position. Most transponders will display a no ADSB annunciation in that case. It's also possibly due to not obtaining a GPS fix prior to departure that the system remains in ground mode in cases there is no WOW switch. In most cases, if this happens, the controller will inform you, if they can, during the flight.
Yeah, my comment would be that the ATC should or may contact you to say that your data is not meeting the minimum performance requirements. Other than that, we do receive, as I mentioned earlier, we receive a number of reports of aircraft that are not meeting the minimum performance requirements. And as part of the grant scheme, I contact those operators just to inform them that either it could potentially be a one-off or it could be a recurring issue, and I'll be in touch regarding that.
Excellent, thanks, Tom. The next one is a similar case. There's a question and an initial response from Renz that I'll open up to the floor here. So the question is, regarding electronic conspicuity equipment, is there a concern that the accuracy from that equipment could adversely impact those that have ADSB in capability? And the response initially from Renz here is that ADSB in at all times is an awareness tool and no replacement for looking out of the cockpit and visually identifying aircraft. Where EC devices may not have the power and accuracy needed for surveillance, they will be accurate enough for awareness users of ADSB in. Do not use ADSB in for traffic avoidance.
Took the words out of my mouth. I'm quite happy with that response. Thanks, Renz.
Excellent. Just scanning along the questions here to see if there's any that I've missed out. Just bear with me a moment. Excellent. Yeah, they're coming in live as I look at them. So the next one for you: how many aircraft need to be equipped to make the system safe for transition from SSR to ADSB? 80%, 90%, all?
No, so what we're looking at is we have a what we're deeming as a target population. This is those commercial aircraft that, to continue operating commercially, they will require to get ADS-B, and that could be all commercial aircraft. So that is one of the areas that we're focusing on. The other aircraft would be those that are based from aerodromes that are in controlled airspace, or operators that go into, or private operators that go into controlled airspace regularly, that is weekly. And of that, we've got a population of around about 2,700 aircraft, which is what we're deeming as the safe transition from SSR over to ADS-B.
Excellent, thanks Tom. We have just ticked past the hour of 8 o'clock, so I'm going to wrap up the question and answer session there. There's one question there that I can answer myself, which is, can we get a copy of the voice recording for this meeting along with updated media? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. So just a note for all attendees that have participated in the webinar series this week, you will receive an email from me subsequent to the event, which will include a link to the recordings of all 3 of the webinars that we've had, and also a 1-minute feedback survey that we would kindly request you to take a minute to fill out. Really valuable for us to figure out how best to engage with you in terms of raising awareness about future events that we would have, and also what type of communication activities and events you would find to be high value yourself. So with that borne in mind, I want to thank everyone who's been able to participate over the past 3 days, and I'm going to pass over to Director New Southern Sky, Steve Smith, for some closing comments on our NSS conference.
Right, thanks very much, Lorcan, and thanks for hosting the last three webinars over the 3 nights. You've done it really well. Tom, thanks for putting on what I can only call a very comprehensive briefing for everybody. It's been a real eye-opener for me, just how much is inside the ADS-B box. When you open it up, you know, there are layers and layers and layers of it. Now, I called it a bit of an information sponge. I think that's been vindicated. Not only are you a sponge, but you can readily reproduce all the information in a very coherent and understandable manner. So well done, Tom. That was an excellent briefing on the ADS-B system. To everybody who's out there tonight that's joined us, thank you very much. We really appreciate it. We really appreciate the questions. You'll note Tom said that we really do like to hear from you. And if you've got concerns, you want to talk about those concerns, you want to put ideas to us, we're open to that. The NSS team and the CA generally. We want to make the system safe. We want to get this system transitioned to ADS-B in the most efficient manner possible. So look, thanks everybody for joining us, and thanks to Andy Alford and to Renz for chipping in and helping us to put all this together. And to anyone else out there who is looking for ADS-B information, please follow that up. So back to you, Lorcan. That's it, I think, for tonight.
Many thanks, Steve. Many thanks, Tom, and others as contributors, and massive thank you to all of the participants both this evening and this week. That is all from the NSS Conference, first ever virtual webinar series in the books. Have a lovely evening and enjoy the rest of your week. Take care.